So some of the things that we've been doing, just building trust and connection in the community, like it might not seem directly related to climate justice, but it really, we need to have these like social network together for when things do get extreme.
Welcome to the Deceleration Podcast, where we sit down with activists, artists, and academics to give them time and space to reflect on the ideas behind their community work. I'm Marisol Cortez, and I am the co-editor of Deceleration. In this episode, I'll be talking with Cara Jordan, who is an herbalist, an urban ag specialist, and a mother, deeply involved in mutual aid projects around extreme heat in her East Side neighborhood. She's also engaged with the city's new Climate Ready Neighborhoods program, which directs funding to neighborhood-based climate resilience projects. So we'll hear a little bit about that too. Thank you so much for talking to Deceleration. We really respect the work that all of the realms of work that you do around climate justice and heat. And I know you are involved with a lot of projects and efforts. And so I thought we could just start by maybe if you wanted to tell listeners a little bit about yourself and the different work that you do around climate justice, the different projects you've been involved with.
Yes, so my name is Cara Jordan, and I am an herbalist specializing in regenerative agriculture, and I'm also a mother. I'm kind of a nerd, and so I'm super passionate about learning and intersectionality, and I believe everything is connected and interdependent, just like you find in a garden. So I've really structured my life around that way of like being and thinking. So keeping it to the climate justice aspect of my work, in collaboration with some other wonderful mothers, I became involved with launching San Antonio's chapter of Mothers Rebellion, which is a non-hierarchical group of mothers and allies of mothers, and we gather in peaceful and silent protest in public spaces in what's called mother circles. And so Mothers Rebellion is a global organization, but it has chapters all over the world, and really the main focus is just showing up and sitting in community together. There's lots of groups out there that are signing petitions or, doing the amazing work of yelling through microphones and getting people's attentions. But this group is really more focused on kind of sharing space with each other and processing emotions, whether that's grief or anger. And just, it's a kid-friendly space, and there's themed events. So the last one was African Liberation Day, as far as like a global cities all around the world doing the protest on the same day. And so that was really focused on highlighting our sisters in Africa and kind of the impacts of the tech revolution on climate, which has been horrible, all of the exploitation that's been going on there. So we just sat and peacefully take up space. It's really cool. We've been doing it at Yanawana Gardens. So people kind of walk by and they check out the signs and ask what's going on. It's very small, but we hope to build capacity over time and put on our own events that are a little bit more specific to some of the needs of the community. Like there was one in Sweden where they did like a knitting for climate change. So maybe we can have our own events like that. I'm also part of the East Side Heat Team is what we originally called it, but we are going to change it to like climate response team. And that is a group of neighbors and friends who gather weekly at a local park to distribute supplies to our resource insecure neighbors and anybody who's in need, really, who may be in need of items to get through the heat. So we collaborate with mutual aid organizations to get our supplies. And it can be anything from like electrolytes, or Red Star has been providing some amazing pasta salad as a cooling meal. We have popsicles, frozen water bottles, cold packs, anything that can help people really get through the heat. And I also help to run Eastside Sprout Garden, and that's kind of one of those things that's an example of how everything is connected, because like for last week we had frozen watermelon that we got from the garden that we were able to give out to the community. So really, I have a vision of how the community gardens can help, resource people in our neighborhoods get through food insecurity, which is a major issue when you don't have your basic needs met, when the challenges of climate change and the disruptions that come from that. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to face those things, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So some of the things that we've been doing, just building trust and connection in the community, like it might not seem directly related to climate justice, but it really, we need to have these like social network together for when things do get extreme, or even when they don't. So we know who to call upon, we know where resources are, and we just trust each other better.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. And I was just taking some notes, like you reminded me how important, like with the Mother's Rebellion work, how important affect, like with an A, affect, like how we emotionally respond to stuff, or like the emotions that are invoked in us, like what an important part of climate response it is to sort of like think about what kind of affect we want to cultivate in response to urgent and emergency like situations. Like if our affect is anxious, or if it's enraged, or if it's panic, like sometimes that, or if it's despair, right, like that can inhibit like doing what we need to do in order to take action, right? So I like how Mother's Rebellion sort of like kind of like flies in the face of those dominant affects that we tend to think of as like, oh, we should be really anxious, we should be panicked, we should be sort of like working faster and faster and faster and more and more and more, fight, right? And I think like deceleration too is about really like the urgency of slowing down, like
it's a hard thing to balance, like that sense of urgency, like these things are happening now, they're not, and so I'm right there with you, like and how I like the way you use the word dominant, like the dominant affect, because there are certainly spaces that are like, come out and be angry and yell, and it's super valid, but there are less spaces that are like, just come and be, whatever that is for you in this moment as you deal with climate change.
Right. Yeah. So just sitting, in silence together, right? Like building that social network of support and care, right? Like that's really important work. I know you've been involved too in the climate ready neighborhoods program. Could you talk a little bit about like that work as well?
Yes, and so it's interesting. We're doing, actually planning for the heat forums with deceleration, doing some of that, showing up to some of the meetings that y'all had, and some of the conversations that were had there about creating pods and just about increasing communication and kind of breaking down some of the silos that are happening with different organizations trying to do things. I thought it was really interesting when the city came out with this program, because it's specifically made about creating pods within your neighborhood. And it just seemed to really reflect a lot of the conversations that were going on just on a grassroots level with people who are doing direct aid work. And so right now they have a 5K micro grant that's available for really, and the great thing about it is it's because it's available for anyone. You can just be a grassroots organization. You don't have to be a 501c3 or anything like that. And they just want you to hear about what ideas you have for addressing climate change within your unique neighborhood, because all neighborhoods have different needs.
Yeah.
And they make the application super easy. You don't have to be a professional grant writer, which is a kind of a barrier to entry for a lot of these other climate focused grants. And it seems to be a very like listening grant that's empowering people who are already out there doing the work. And then the 5K grant later there's an opportunity, like based on what things are tested in your neighborhood, to receive a 20K grant. So I've been really focused on looking at like whether it's community gardens or neighborhood association I'm also involved with, and this climate group, like trying to be a facilitator between like the city and these resources the city has with this grant to these other entities, and kind of bringing everyone together has like been my focus with the that program.
Gotcha. And you're in Dignity Hill, is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, when you look at the landscape of climate impacts here locally and even hyper locally, like in your own neighborhood, and how we respond, like what do you see as the biggest problem, and why do you feel like everybody has a sort of like stake in that, or why should everybody be doing something about that?
Mm-hmm. I think disconnection and the lack of prioritization around building social infrastructure is the biggest problem, which, that's directly related to disconnection. And that can be between neighbors, that can be between, like I mentioned, the neighborhood association and the rest of the people in the community or the city. And like, there's just people have different needs and they have having a hard time seeing that climate affects literally everyone. Even if you're mega wealthy, you can't escape from pollution, you can't escape from heat and toxic environments if you live here. Like, this is something that everybody has to face. I mean, even I was reading the other day about like reproductive health and heat, and how in a state that's supposed to care so much about babies, the impact of being in extreme heat on pregnant women, even for a small amount of time, is very, could be very negative. So this is something everybody should care about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of maybe one of the, I say unique or distinctive, and it sounds like a positive. I mean, it is. It's both a negative thing and a positive thing, that like climate change is this thing that, like it's this unifying thing. Like we're all going through it, right? Whether, no matter what our social location is, right? Even globally. But at the same time, then it creates this opportunity to it's something that everybody can respond to, like together. It's an opportunity to like rebuild some of that the social fabric, right? The networks of care, right, that have been destroyed by histories of colonial violence and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And the disconnection is like, I feel like people don't see that they can unify over climate change, even though, to me, it feels very obvious because they are in their individual homes. Oftentimes those homes are AC'd, and it's like a protection kind of barrier. Like, there's so many barriers from one another and from the issue, whether it's our screens or, just systemic issues. And so that's a big problem as far as like how we respond collectively, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of folks want to do something, right? They want to plug in, but maybe they don't know where to start because the problem does seem so big. What do you see across all of the various like projects you're involved in as the most important ways people can plug in, right? Like starting from where they are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because people are so different. Like, there's people that are like, I don't want to have anything to do with the city government, or there's people that are like, I only want to deal with institutions. Like, what is mutual aid? They're not structured. Like, so meeting people where they're at, which is what I really like about the Climate Ready Neighborhoods workshops, for example, because they gather the people from all of these groups together. And like the first workshop there were people that didn't even really know what was going on, but they were exposed to the idea and were invited to show up. And I think that's really helpful, especially when it feels overwhelming. But I just, for me, because I've only been involved really for a couple years now in this type of work, at this pace, and it's like you don't have to reinvent the wheel or start a new group. Like, the fact is that there is so much already out there, and so I think it's like finding the city obviously has websites, and then there's also social media. And so it's just like putting your foot in the door and then seeing which direction you want to go. And for example, with mutual aid, realizing that mutual aid can be just you as an individual filling up your local food pantry, with frozen water. Mm-hmm. It can look like choosing to donate your winter clothes to SA Collective Care instead of Goodwill. Like it doesn't have to be this, wild thing, or it can be like you just connecting someone to something else. Like that is so powerful. And it's kind of it can go underappreciated. But putting people together, which is like really amazing about the city program, is just one of the main things. And that goes back to like building social infrastructure, having these communal spaces where we can have these conversations.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned, we've been talking about mutual aid, and for those that may not be familiar with that term, can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? Like both the ideas behind it, right? But then the actual practice too, like on a neighborhood level. What are some of well, we'll start there, and then I'll ask you more about kind of like, challenges of that approach, and also, what makes it so successful or, powerful.
Yeah, I think, and there's probably like a dictionary definition that I'm going to bungle or something, but mutual and like direct aid is where we as a collective people, we don't need another entity or government or institution to tell us how to like help one another in whatever way that may be. It's just people getting together and doing it, for better or worse. It can be very challenging work, but it's like neighbors helping neighbors, community at its simplest level. I think that's what defines mutual aid, and without all of these like layers of like bureaucracy and all these things that can come in between, which can happen when the government is involved or institutions are involved, which they have their own place, but yeah, that's mutual aid to me. And so like what we're doing on the east side with the heat team right now, that's mutual aid, but also the examples about filling the food pantries, that's also mutual aid.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And what have you seen in doing kind of that bottom up work of mutual aid in your neighborhood around heat specifically? What are the biggest challenges you've seen, and also what's been most successful?
Around heat specifically, I'd say, it can just be the organization aspect in itself. Like if some people feel very strongly or passionately about certain political things, for example. And so if you can't, there's like purity politics that can happen. And if you can't, it can make even the mutual aid groups operate in fractured ways. So if you're trying to gather resources to do a heat distribution, and maybe some groups don't get along, which I haven't with this team that I'm working with. It's been really great, but that's kind of a theme that sometimes is a challenge with mutual aid group work in general. And then there's also just the funding. A lot, like this East Side team, we're funding that ourselves. There's an amazing mutual aid network that we can resource from, and that's been incredible as far as like getting electrolytes and reproductive health products and some of the cooling items for the heat team. But some of these things like cold packs and the cooling bandanas and sunscreen really add up. And so a lot of the people doing this work are not even resource secure themselves. So it's like that produces also a mental strain. There's also just dealing with substance abuse in the heat and mental health issues in the heat. Everything is turned up to 150% when you have this extreme weather. And so not everyone is equipped or trained for that, and it can be very difficult.
For sure. Yeah, I think you and I were talking in an earlier moment about like, the with Albert, some of the sort of I guess, less discussed, like just like what is that kind of, what is the informal like promotora work?
Mm.
You know, like what is that really like in terms of how, you know, the demands that it makes on, there's a level of sort of like vicarious trauma that can happen, right?
Yeah,
The folks that are trying to even assist folks that are in even deeper trauma.
absolutely.
Yeah. But then what's been, we could talk a lot about like the challenges of that, but like what have you seen be really successful, maybe even
Yeah,
in unexpected ways?
I mean, I mentioned that about like, purity politics and things, but also just like people overcoming all of that and just like showing up, like, this single mother is in need of, she's about to lose her rent. She's got two kids, like, we need $350. Like, people not asking, of course, there's a lot of trust. There's just a lot of inherent trust in the community and people showing up and getting things done, like in a way that city government is oftentimes criticized for not having the resources or capacity or will to do, where you just have these average people, and a lot of people, like I said, that are resource insecure, they are just getting things done. They're picking up supplies all on their own time. Like, I'm just really amazed at the capacity and the heart and the drive. And I've just met a lot of great people. And also, I've been very impressed with, like, some groups have like very intense like organizational structure, and I'm like and documentation, and I think that's also like another really amazing thing, and that's all self driven, and I think it's really that's the success of like the visible social and connection and the tangible results that have come from all this communication and work. Like, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely something we also saw, like with Albert, is just how much people can get done, like in very pragmatic ways, like just a small team of people,
Yeah.
together, from sort of in different relationships to like institutional power, right? Like some people are more outside, some people are more inside, but even just like 3 or 4 people, like working across those lines on something very concrete, very pragmatic with total, like drive or dedication, like
Mm-hmm.
so much can happen that way.
Yeah, it's inspiring because you think about if people were empowered to do even more mutual aid, like the exponential impact of that. Like, I'm really like energized by it.
Yeah. So if it sounds like it's been a positive thing to sort of like see the city kind of top down climate response take up some of the approaches, right, that have kind of like long, not only take up, but also resource
Mm-hmm.
the work that's already happening kind of from the bottom up, right? Um,
Yes.
and so I guess one of my questions is, if we do see the city taking on some of that organizing and funding of the bottom up work, why do we still need both, right? Why do we still need mutual aid from the bottom, but then like policy and stuff from the top? Why is an intersectional response to climate crisis so important?
Right. And some of that would be like what I mentioned before about individuals themselves feeling like they don't want to work with the city or whatever. So it's nice to have the options for different people for how they want to show up in their community. That's one aspect. Then there's just the fact of the matter of like resources and money and capitalism, and that like the city has money and they have funding, and a lot of the mutual aid groups just simply don't. And so like so sometimes it's getting the money from the city to the mutual aid groups. It's offering a place for you to show up regardless of like your beliefs. But it's also like there's just the city, unfortunately, whether it's the federal government or the city government, that their policies impact organizing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, in my opinion, be aware and influence and take up space in the city government as well as mutual aid. Like they really do go hand in hand. If like we're not allowed to gather over certain subject matter, if that's decided, which I wouldn't, based on certain candidates, I wouldn't be surprised if wild policies like that were put forward. How can we do the mutual aid work? So you really have to have your finger on both, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Also, the city doesn't have a lot of the skills and resources that your average people do. They don't have the trust, they don't have the connection, they don't have the sometimes willingness to show up consistently in the way that these mutual aid groups and people do. So that's another huge aspect, I think.
Yeah. I've been reading, it's this huge book. It's a political history of ACT UP, the organization ACT UP. Kind of late 80s, early 90s, like AIDS activists in mostly New York City, but the historian talks a lot about that, like how successful they were because they had this inside outside strategy. They had people with AIDS going into like spaces of the FDA or the CDC, right? And in ways that people affected by HIV themselves like never had access, right? But then you also had, they were held, they were empowered by the hundreds of people outside of those institutions, like that were kind of like organizing the protests and the demonstrations and that kind of thing. So like it was on account of both of those strategies working together in this very coordinated way that you actually really saw impact, for people with AIDS at that time. And yeah, like and that was kind of like the big lesson or reminder for me too, like with the case of Albert, was like, yeah, like working across these institutional lines of inside and outside, like it was very powerful. It was very, like if only that could happen.
Yeah. And it highlights, like, it helps to, some people have the belief that like you just can't fix the city things, but I think doing that inside outside work, like it helps even highlight furthermore the issues that come with city programs or things so that there can be some accountability there, hopefully.
One question to kind of come back to a little bit, we started talking about how climate change kind of is this distinctive thing that everybody's going through at the same time, and that allows us to kind of imagine new ways of being together or working together. When you look at how folks have responded in other communities around the world, what are some ideas that you've seen people put into practice elsewhere that you would want to see like us do in San Antonio?
Yeah, and this is something that I've been researching more and more lately, but I've been so hyper focused on local that maybe I don't have maybe some of these things that I'll list we already are doing here, but I just don't know about it. But the other day, there's creative things. Like the other day, I was reading an article about this town in Italy where a lot of the grandmothers and mothers got together and they made this incredible crochet shade cover that goes through the entire city. Like there's creative things like that I think we could capitalize on, and have competitions and some incentive to do things like that in the city. There's also like monetized incentives for eradicating or capturing invasive or destructive species. Or I'm always baffled why we don't have mandatory like water catchment with new developments here. Like it's with the drought, I don't understand that at all. And I know that that's an infrastructure thing and a cost thing, but at this point, I don't think that's good enough of an answer not to do it. There's also, they cleaned up the Seine despite the problems that there were with the Olympics. Why can't we clean up the Riverwalk? Um, these are sacred waters, and I feel like the city really owes it to the people to take care of the waters. They're the lifeblood of all things on earth. The rivers are the arteries, and I'd really love to see the Riverwalk initiative to clean the Riverwalk. I know that we have the wildlife, the Tobin Land Bridge at the Phil Hardberger Park. Like all these, there's a lot of amazing small things that I think if we could do more wildlife corridors, more trees, and I know we have tree initiatives. I'm really excited. Bare Branches in my neighborhood specifically is doing a tree program where you can sign up and get any of the trees, like local native species, and they'll help you plant them even. So there's a lot. Edible cities too. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Edible Cities Network, but that would also increase like tree canopy and also food sources for people, keep water in the ground and in the grass and plants. Like these are things that I think we could easily implement here. We just have to to actually prioritize it.
Yeah. And I guess that's too like it kind of gets back to the question of sort of mutual aid, direct action. Like there can be, I mean, a flowering of multiple like tiny efforts, right? Where people can go out and do them can be as powerful as sort of like we don't have to wait around for San Antonio to do those things either. Like I think one of there's like a river cleanup group here that kind of spun off of like, I want to say Gardopia maybe. And does that ring a bell? Like,
yeah, they often do cleanups at Salado Creek. I haven't been able to join one, but they've been really consistent. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it's just cleaning up the rivers, I mean, or the way that DSA goes under goes to the encampments under the highways, like very consistently, right?
Yeah.
Like
For 2 years, they haven't missed a Saturday. It's amazing. And actually, after we finish distributing at the park we distribute at on Saturdays, that's been a great spot to go and see if anybody would like any of the leftovers, that we have from our distribution. And I've only been a few times, but it's been good to see the work that they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And then just any last things that you didn't get to talk about or that you think it's really important for listeners to understand, I guess related to sort of climate justice or extreme heat or mutual aid or anything?
I think I know it can be I am an introverted person, but and I know it can be overwhelming, but like, it's so important to get to know your neighbors and even also the businesses and the organization. Like start small, start at least there with your own home and your own street. And, you'd be surprised at the things that you might learn if you put some time and effort there. And then, from Google, you can look on social media and read the news. Like if you look up Mutual Aid San Antonio, and like you can start getting an idea and look at their socials and see who you might want to contribute to. Like there's a lot of climate justice. It's so inherently wrapped in everything, right? Like so I feel like there is a lot of opportunity based on who you are as a person and what you're passionate about to get involved. You just gotta take the first step and bring a friend. What if it's the river cleanup? It can be simple, and it can actually be fun too. So that's a big thing, is just take the first step and getting connected, I think, and it'll lead you places that you maybe wouldn't expect, and it'll be great.
Yeah, that's a beautiful place to stop. I think it's always such a pleasure and just an honor to talk with you and hear more about your work. And for us to be able to kind of like bring that to a wider readership and listenership. So yeah, much thanks, Kara, and we will post this to Deceleration along with I'll check in with you about like when folks can look for like for example the next Mother Rebellion action or like the next climate readiness neighborhoods meetings. But I'll follow up with you and I'll post that information when we post the podcast. So
awesome.
Much thanks to you. And
thank you so much, Marisol.
Yeah,
this was great. Yeah. It's great to think about these things like too out loud, outside of my head.
yeah. This is, I mean, exactly why we like to talk to folks that are doing the on the ground work because it is intellectual work too, right? Like
yes,
embodied, but they're also these ideas behind the embodied work, the neighborhood work that I feel like we just don't like build spaces for within organizing, to sort of just sit and reflect, right? Or to try to put into words like what are the idea, what is the theory behind the praxis, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it was really great hearing some of that.
Thank you.
We'll talk more soon. To support the Eastside Heat Team, call or text 210-463-5194. You can donate your time, your money, or specific items like water bottles, electrolyte packets, sunscreen and chapstick, fans, and umbrellas. For updates on the next Mothers Rebellion action, look on Instagram for mothers_rebellion_SATX. Also, the next Climate Ready Neighborhoods Network meeting is coming up this week on August 22nd at 9 a.m. For more info, see the podcast notes for the link.